What?
There we are again then.
Yeah, where's everyone else?
Don't know. Lisa's usually pretty prompt. I just clicked on the link in the bulletin. I assume you did too.
Yes, I mean, a bit of relief actually, because I haven't made progress. I've been trying to get something else written.
Yeah, I haven't done anything much either. I'm doing homeschooling with Ella later, so I was trying to get Louise to photograph the maths book we've got to do, or that she'll be doing, so that I can, you know, check them when she's done them and so on. I need to know what the questions are, so I'm just fiddling on with things like that. We're on rounding today, very exciting. It's the only and sort of slightly irritating thing, and I assume they do this a lot at school anyway, is that it's all revision again. I mean, it was stuff we were doing last March when in the first lockdown they were setting.
So how old is she and what's she doing?
Ella is just 9. She's year 4, and her school, they simply send, you know, a page of literacy and a page of maths to do from a book.
You got to in maths? What sort of?
Well, it flicks around all over the place. So she's been doing, I mean, quite a lot of dealing with really quite large numbers, whether it's, you know, division or multiplying or sort of understanding them in general, seems to have been what we've been doing the last. So I assume that's what we're rounding as well, but I haven't looked at the questions yet. And sort of things that are obviously leading to algebra, in the sense that you've got an equation with a gap in it that you have to fill, but they don't actually give it a letter. You know, it's a question mark or a little box or something.
It's almost getting into algebra. I was wondering when children get that.
Yeah, well, that seems to me, I mean, because it's a tiny step to call it a letter, rather than saying what goes in this box. Yeah. Or, you know, what's the question mark? Morning, Lisa.
Morning, Lisa.
Hello.
I'm interested because I've one of Claire's twins, Annabelle, was saying she loved maths the other day, so I was thinking I must
find out what she's. How old are they? A little bit younger?
They're almost 12.
Oh, they're old. Okay.
And if you'll forgive me, this chocolate cake I'm eating is the other twin, Nicholas's enterprise. He's decided that selling cakes to grandparents is a good way to
raising money.
Down.
It's a lovely thought. Yes. Well, if he could send some down a wire, I'd be happy to buy some of his cake.
I don't think he does mail order yet.
Right. Morning, Ben.
Morning.
So where do you think we are with this, Lisa? Dennis and I had a meeting with Kira earlier, and we were talking about sort of what we ought to set as timescales for the challenges volume and so on. So
yes. So I think we've still got a couple of weeks of getting a paragraph written for each challenge. It looks like we have a couple in the Dropbox, but still a couple more to do.
Apologies.
What sort of schedule are we working to? I was going to ask.
Well, I think to some extent it's a little bit circular, but I suspect that you know, what we were saying earlier was actually setting some deadlines might help people to actually, you know, focus minds a bit, because otherwise things just drift on, don't they? There's always something higher up the list of priorities that one needs to do today. I don't know, we were sort of thinking by aiming for having papers ready to be submitted by the end of March. Does that sound feasible? Do you think?
Yeah,
I mean,
that
it's general.
sounds doable.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they'll need to have a round of sort of, once we've got each paper, to have a round of sort of internal reviewing, really, by Dennis and me as editors, but also as everybody, really, just sort of seeing the thing as a whole and making suggestions and so on, and tightening things up as much as we can.
In terms of progress, I think possibly this challenge is sort of middle of the road. There are a couple that are sort of definitely further forward, the modelling and estimation, and several that are we rather suspect are lagging behind, which we're setting ourselves a mission to chase up. But I think the end of March should be doable.
It would be useful to know if you both think, I mean, you're involved in not just this one, but particularly Ben, in all sorts of bits and pieces around. So do you think, although the ones you're involved in, 6 and 7,
they're doing rather well.
are doing quite well. So this is obviously Ben's influence. So
yeah,
we'll have to sort
of
drop you into some of the others as well.
Yeah. I think
estimation and modelling are probably fairly, I would say advanced enough to aim for end of March. I guess the data paper is still fairly early days, but I think there's going to be quite a lot of borrowing from other sections on that paper anyway. So again, I kind of agree with the idea. If we set a deadline at the end of March, then I think it will encourage people to get more prioritizing of that particular aspect. So yeah, I think that would be achievable for most of the ones I'm involved.
That's good. Morning, Chris.
Morning. So I've just switched over from the wrong Zoom link, and I think Duncan will follow shortly.
Yeah, sorry, I just saw that IDP had changed their Zoom links.
Yes. That's it's because in order to have, we wanted to be able to share screens and record at these sessions, and so you've noticed it's recording, and now the ones they've set up will record automatically without having to have an I&I staff member as a host in order to do that. But it means all the links had to change, so if people use old ones, they're likely to be stuffed, basically. So, but I think that the idea is that going forward, we'll basically just have 2 links, which
no, you won't do. No.
One link that's we'll use for these sort of sessions, and which will sort of scheduled sessions in the bulletin, and they'll record automatically, and another link that people can use at any time for an informal discussion, which won't record. So hopefully that will be fairly straightforward, but we just need to get across the bridging a bit. So
yeah, so I've just sent an email around with the new link in case anyone didn't see it, and I've just changed a few people use the kind of Google Calendar event, so I've just updated that as well, in case anyone is lost.
great. Hopefully.
Well, I've got to remove the old bulletin from the IDP Dropbox, so it's if you look for bulletin there, you'll only get the current one. There's a thing called archive bulletins where the rest are hiding.
So I'm not sure we really need them archived, but the only thing is that it's sometimes useful if you, as we do, have to write reports that say what's been happening, for the institute. It's quite useful to have the old ones to go back to, and so we did this, that, and the other.
It's just occurred to me I haven't added my paragraph to the Dropbox, so I shall do that now.
Which one was this?
So we've got one from Chris and one from Ben, I think. Is that right? And now, so we've got 6, 7, and 8, and 5.
For 5 is just put in as an example, popped in as a
Oh, that was
first
the one.
example.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a paragraph from.
So what should we be focusing on? Still the combined lists in terms of,
Yes, yeah, that's what the numbering refers to.
right.
So yeah, so it looks like we've got something from 6, 7, and 8.
Oh, Dennis, we're behind the
Yeah,
again here.
I ought to leave this call and get back to doing something about 1, 2, and 3. Unless anyone wants, well, perhaps if people would like to say if they've had any further thoughts on 1, 2, or 3, they'd like me to take into account. And but otherwise, thing is, I decided that I think I need to go back and do quite a lot of reading of some. I've saved copies of quite a lot of good papers and articles along the way, and I need to go back and. So unfortunately, sufficiently far back for them, I need to go through and read them all. I think to.
One thing that I don't know quite where it goes. I wrote a couple of sentences in the modelling paper yesterday, but maybe it's here. Is the whole idea of sort of setting up networks. I mean, one of the reasons the modelling people have been in reasonably good shape is because we've had this network, Newton and other things, but building up over a long time. And by and large, people do know each other and are used to working together. And it's not just the modelers, but all the sort of the experimental people, the data people, and so on. And what we really need, I think, going forward is some sort of similar network whereby policymakers and the modelers are used to working together. I mean, it does happen in some fields. So, I've worked a lot in hydrology, and I know a lot of the hydrologists, and they're quite good networks there. And other people have done things. I mean, Chris has talked quite a bit about energy and so on. So it's within areas, but perhaps there's a need somehow to have better, better interaction, both nationally and internationally, between the modelers and, of course, the economists and the behavioural sciences and all the rest of it, but particularly with the policymakers, so that you've got some sort of familiarity with where other people are coming from and the language they use, and some sort of trust built up, which I think you get within particular fields, but perhaps we haven't got at the moment with this sort of thing. But I don't know quite where that fit. Maybe in the long-term thinking and preparedness.
This idea of sort of strengthening the collaboration network is a very wide-ranging one, isn't it? I mean, we were talking about with our organised meeting earlier with Cara, Valerie, and I were talking about sort of publishing and the peer review process, and also the research funding. The research funding policy in a country like this, I mean, if because it is so competitive, it really does not encourage the kind of collaboration that one would like to see going forward, I think. But I'm sure there are, but equally, I mean, I'm sure it happens at the international level. I mean, for instance, I mean, it's occurring to me that this idea that maybe it's a good idea because of short-term pressure to give one-shot vaccinations instead of two-shot, seems to me there's a very good argument for saying that should be a WHO level decision, because there's the risk that if countries do that, it's going to help the virus to evolve into more virulent strains. Now, if that's a real danger, just one country deciding on a one-shot policy. You know, it might save lives in that individual country in the first few months because it gets more people vaccinated. But if it stands, let's say, a 10 or 50% chance of giving us a more virulent strain that then goes around the world in a more unstoppable way, it's been a huge drawback. And I think, I think you could almost argue international collaboration in some ways almost non-existent in this pandemic, isn't it? I mean, every country has done its own things about quarantine and who's allowed to travel in or out, and they often seem ridiculous. You know, there's a country where the disease is raging, saying it's going to make it more difficult for people to travel in from a country where it's not doing anything like as badly. So maybe that's. So I think we've got a sort of international cooperation thing, haven't we? That
Yeah.
but the idea of encouraging collaboration where it's needed perhaps sort of stretches across quite a lot of part of the policy field.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
But
You could put it in
somehow-
the. Sorry, you could put it in the communication section.
Yeah. Yeah.
but somehow international cooperation is a whole bigger sort of problem area. But even
trying to put
within the
one's finger
country,
on
there's a lot of
which
scope for.
Trying to put one's finger on which bits of international collaboration it might be realistic to try and improve and which bits you're never going to improve. Is something where you well, I suppose you could sound very sort of wishy-washy and but I think one needs to say something. Perhaps we can't say very much, but
Okay. Chris, did you think Duncan was joining?
Yes, I did. Well, I assumed he was because I'd been with him in the other Zoom call, and I left when I picked up your email, and then I left a message in the chat saying, "See Liza's email." It's possible that because he'd actually just taken a phone call. So it's possible that he's still on that phone call, or something had happened, or he's homeschooling, so maybe something came up there.
Yeah, he might have got hold up. Well, I'm sure he'll join if he can later. And then Kerry Anna's just changed something in the Dropbox, so I don't know if she's joining. Mysterious. Okay, we'll see. Okay. Well, if anyone else joins, then we can update them. So I didn't know what we wanted to do today. We only have a small group, so that might change things. I think the options are divide up the remaining challenges and then have a go writing either sort of offline or online or however. Or sort of suggest edits for the paragraphs that we've got so far, either as a whole group or split into smaller groups, or that might also work better individually. I think I'd like to keep them as sort of separate documents for now, each sort of
Yeah.
challenge, just so we don't get confused and it would be too long to read everything in one go. Do people have a preference for whether they'd like to do some editing, look at the ones existing, or do we
What
think all of
sort
those
of-
things are better sort of done offline?
What sort of style are you aiming for in terms of how the challenges, you know, whether the challenges are a section with commentary, or whether you have commentary and the challenges arrive at, you know, this sort of alternative style thing?
Yeah. So for my paragraph, I just copied Ben's style, and that just tried to write sort of a few sentences or something about each kind of bullet point that we've made so far.
Yeah.
But in terms of thinking more long term, I guess we're aiming for the sort of layout that the modeling people are going for. So having, in this case, 9 challenges, sort of overarching challenges, each with a few kind of paragraphs or so.
Right. Okay. Yep. So the bullet points you've got at the moment in these would all be subheadings, if you like, between the
Yeah, they could.
sub challenges. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was thinking. Does
Yeah.
anyone have any?
So column A is the challenges, and column B are sort of paragraphs within that challenge. Is that
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they could be labelled as sub challenges if we need to make it clearer. What we've done at the moment is bullet points.
Well, I think what I think it was Ben did, but in the modelling was to sort of the sub challenges were just sort of in bold in the text, weren't they? And I thought that worked quite well.
Yeah.
I don't know what other people thought. I quite liked that style. I thought that was, because, you know, if you have too many sort of headings and subheadings,
Yeah.
it all gets a bit overstructured. But just having a sort of within the main challenge, a sort of narrative, and then the sort of key phrases or whatever put in bold seemed, I thought, was a really good way of doing it. But, and obviously Ben thought it was a good way of doing it, since I think he was the instigator of this.
Yeah, it's not.
But I don't know how, you know, if people feel that works well. It's just that when we put all this together, we really need a sort of to decide which way one wants to do it.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. So I have I don't know, numbers 1 to 8 as headings, challenges, and then
From your list, your challenge 1 to 8. Yeah.
within each of those, continuous prose with sort of bold sentence for the sub challenge or kind of the point you're making.
You've just suddenly gone very quiet for me. Is it the same for everyone?
Oh, sorry. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. It's my microphone. I still haven't repaired it.
That's all right. Not an issue, but you know, it's always a bit unnerving. You think, oh, is it me? Is my system going down?
No, it's definitely my laptop. It happens, well, more and more often. So I should repair it.
No, that's fine.
Yes, so we'll have the challenge 1 to 8, and then within each one, aim for sort of paragraphs, like how Chris has done. We're suggesting bold font, the kind of key point for each within each paragraph.
Well, possibly, yes. I thought, I mean, we could, obviously we can change it later, but that seemed to be a good route. So, Dennis, are you going to have a first go at 1 and 2, or?
Yeah, one I was going to go 1, 2, 3. I feel I should probably ring off and get on with that. What about
Okay. So do you
4?
want to send me when you've got a few thoughts down,
I'll send you something. Yeah.
and I'll try and
Try and
help
make
and
real
chip in on
progress
those.
before next Tuesday. Yeah. What about 4?
Well,
think-
we've got Duncan against that one.
Yes.
So unfortunately, we haven't got Duncan, but
Yeah. Kerry Ann has also just added her name to 3, so she's happy to make a start on this for others to expand on. That's international
Great.
cooperation.
Yeah. yeah, that would be good.
And then I think the only one we haven't done is communication. Really, we just have my example paragraph so far. But I think that is everything else.
There was a single bullet point in 10.7 that I wasn't quite sure what it meant. I don't know if you could.
Was it ensemble modelling?
No, I understood that it was the modelling techniques are predetermined, and there's a link to Duncan's risk analysis paper. I wasn't quite sure exactly what he meant by that, so I didn't expand on it.
Yeah, we'll have to ask Duncan. Duncan wrote
Okay,
that
if
one.
it's Duncan, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll ask Duncan when he next joins. Yeah, he wrote. It's a link to a document he wrote, so I'm sure he'll be able to tell us about it.
Yeah, I did look at the paper, but I wasn't sure exactly which aspect he was saying was the challenge.
And Duncan and I are planning to have some further exchange once interaction between start of semester and homeschooling permits.
Yes, of course. I don't know if maybe today we want to sort of split off and either have a go at writing something else or have a go at looking at the ones that have been written, providing some sort of comments for the others.
Would it be useful to have a quick look at the ones that have been written, or maybe we can't comment quickly enough? I don't know. Get it some
Yep.
a quick read of the ones that we've got. Maybe, I don't know.
Yep, of course, yeah. So
whatever you think.
Yeah, I'm happy to either sort of do it together or separately. Either is fine. Ben, Chris, do you have any preferences?
It might be useful to have a quick look through together, just to no, I'm not on mute. To have a quick look through together just to see if there's anything we can contribute. I just had a quick look through some of them. I'm still not sure my Dropbox is updating properly. Yes, it looks like it might be. I certainly have something that's updated during this meeting.
Yeah. Well, I've got the combined list has updated, and the 10.6 has updated today. And then we've got, well, I've got Ben's, I think from the 6th of January, and yours from the 5th of January. Are those the most recent of everything?
Yes.
Okay. Which one should we look at first?
So, Chris, am I right in thinking we discussed yours last week, didn't we?
Yes, yeah, we did, and then and this is where we ended up with this this slightly slightly surreal bit of the meeting where Duncan and I were talking as Aquabook aficionados, not realizing that there are people in this world who aren't so familiar with it.
Yes, exactly. And then you shared all the links.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rest of us have a lot of reading.
Yes, quite.
Okay, so then we've got 10.6 or 10.7, so mine and Ben's. Can I nominate Ben? So if we look at 10.7 technical model challenges, make Ben go first.
Sure. I haven't looked at it since last week, so I'm just going to remind myself of what I wrote.
So presumably what you've written in the sort of the second real paragraph below those 2 bullet points,
Yeah.
that's sort of essentially to replace those, is it?
Yes,
As
it's
far
sort
as-
of my expansion and what I think those challenges are. So I could go back through and delete those bullet points if you think that makes sense, but I wanted to keep them there until everyone had a chance to look at it.
Just wanted to check my understanding.
Yeah.
So we need some cross references to some of the I suppose it's challenge 7, isn't it? I'm trying to think where all the model averaging, modeling ensembles would come in there with all the UQ stuff and model comparison and so on.
And I think there's also a big link here in terms of the decision making on emergency timelines with the notes I wrote on policy.
Is that in the Dropbox? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's in the
Okay.
yeah, that's in the Dropbox.
Right, I'll take a look at that.
And there's I mean, I still need to update that following the Aquabook discussion, and I should I think that as we discussed last week, I think that's a very good place on which to hang the government decision support process element, particularly in a Great Britain context.
Right. So that's in the bit that's called temp, or you're suggesting would be all part of the bit that's 10.8. Is that right?
Just let me go.
Or am I looking in the wrong place?
Sorry, it's in the implementing.
Okay, right.
Yeah, sorry, policy is the overall thing. I meant it in the implementing change.
Okay, I'll link through to that.
And then we'll need to decide where, in the end, these things primarily sit.
Yes, well, I think we need to put the whole thing together before we can. I mean, the main thing at the moment is make sure they're in somewhere. If we've thought of them, discuss them. I guess I'm not sure. I mean, the bullet points came, I think, from Lisa putting together thoughts that loads of people had initially, and we sent you ideas and you put them into groups and so on and so forth. So I suppose one of the issues is whether the people that suggested those bullet points feel that what Ben and others in other sections have written has captured what they were thinking of. And of course, I don't know how we decide that. But I think probably if we think what the paragraphs that Ben's got capture the points, then we need to take out the bullets. But then just when people read the whole thing through, they just sort of check through that all the points they originally made. Because I mean, everybody's presumably got their own lists that they sent to you, so that they could remind themselves of that and just check that their points were made. Because I don't know about you, but I find it slightly disconcerting having the bullet points still in the middle.
I agree.
It's sort of.
And I think I've also kind of referred to the bullet points in the text, so I may need to rewrite it just to make sure that the main theme of the bullet points is continued. But that shouldn't be too much of a problem.
Yeah.
Particularly in the kind of ensemble inverse modelling that just referred to the bullet points rather than the actual topics.
There's also, sorry.
I have a feeling Peter wanted to write something about ensemble modelling and or inverse models. I think those were his suggestions. Sorry, carry on, Valerie.
I was going to say that I suppose the other thing is the extent, and I mean that applies to all these papers, not just this section, is the extent to which we want to sort of put examples in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the points have arisen from things that have or are happening, and the extent to which we want to do that. I mean, we don't want to ground it too much in the current pandemic, but on the other hand, it may sometimes be that using an illustration of what's going on at the moment is sort of helpful in seeing how to illustrate the issue. But morning, Peter.
Good morning. Apologies, I now have to teach on Tuesday mornings.
So, Peter, we've just been taking a look at Ben's had a go at writing something on technical model challenges. So it's called 10.7 in the Dropbox. And am I right in thinking you wanted to say something about ensemble modeling or inverse models?
And I've almost written something.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah.
Hopefully I'll put it up by the end of the day, but hopefully.
That's great. Yeah. So we can add that into Ben's draft.
We were saying, Peter, that we think that the paragraphs that Ben has written probably remove the need for the bullet points. I mean, they were to amplify the bullet points. So I think the next stage was just to remove all these bullet points. But we need to make sure that everything that people were thinking of when they wrote the bullet points has been captured. But I think that was more or less where we'd got to in the discussions.
Yeah, no, that looks great. Yeah, I'll go through that. I will slot my bit in.
Perfect. Is there anything else, Ben, that you thought was missing?
No, I think it was just that one bullet point that I wasn't quite sure what
Yeah.
Duncan meant, but we can chase up with him about that.
Yeah. So it's just, I mean, presumably what you've written is what he meant, that you know, people, there are these models that are sort of pre-existing. I mean, thinking about them in terms of computational implementations, I suppose, but rather when he says techniques, but I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, it may have captured that in the response to the next bullet point, but
Yeah,
like you say, it'd be good to check with him that it has captured what he actually meant rather than
okay,
just relying on my interpretation.
Yeah. That sounds good. And so the only other thing would be to make sure we've got as many cross references in as within and between, but to some extent that can be done later. Just if there's anything obvious, it's good to do now.
One of the bullet points was specific things to do with the models used, contract matrices, data assumptions. I think you're right in that mostly fits better in the modelling and other such data papers as well.
Yeah, there's quite a bit about that, or I think there will be.
I think, yeah, you're right. Not to, we don't really need to mention that here.
I mean, we can mention it and just reference, you know, the fact it's discussed elsewhere if there's a specific policy dimension to it. But
I think it looks good though.
I suppose the only policy thing is I mean, in the modelling data sections, you're getting things about what data people would like, and to some extent that impinges on policy in terms of the system being willing to organize itself differently or better or whatever. But I don't know whether there's anything that's useful to say about that here.
Yeah, unfortunately, we still have the modeller's point of view, don't we?
Sorry?
I said, unfortunately, we're all modelers, so we can't really write about the policymaker's point of view.
No.
Yeah. So, just remind me what was the particular question there from the policymaker's perspective?
Well, Valerie was just sort of thinking on the bullet point of specific things to do with models used. Was there sort of a policy desire for certain?
Yes, I was saying that I mean the stuff to do with contact matrices and data and so on can generally just be cross-referenced. But I wondered whether there were specific, you know, if these other groups are setting up challenges to collect certain sorts of data to make databases sort of exchangeable and consistent and all those sort of issues. Are there policy things? I mean, somebody at some point presumably has to make a decision that money will be put into collecting and supporting data collection. And I just wondered whether there was anything to be put here about policy.
Yeah.
It's so far from my area, I don't know at all.
I think this again. This is something where I've kind of seen a bit from the outside in COVID, but I've thought quite a lot about these issues in energy. I mean, one point which I think we talked a bit about last week is that is that in some way I think COVID has woken people up to the fact that there are important matters associated with how these model-based decision support processes are structured and linked together with, and how the modelling is linked together with non-modelling parts of the process. I mean, there might. I mean, in terms of the sort of linking together modelling and data collection, I wonder whether that's part of a broader matter around whether these processes or kind of collections of people need to be more consciously designed. And I genuinely don't know that to the extent to which that works in the pandemic modelling, whether it is that for years there has been some kind of coordinated group of people that where it was intended that they could be brought together as an advisory group in the case of emergencies, or whether it was a bit ad hoc. I mean, I always in energy, I always make the a comparison between the situation in Great Britain and in the US, where with a lot of this kind of thing, or the big scale serious policy support, one problem in Britain can be that there basically isn't anyone to do it, because everyone is working in universities on relatively short-term research contracts, and there are two problems with that. The first is that you don't get continuity, and the second is that the kind of that university academics are in the business of publishing research in journals, and that's the goals in goals of the academics and universities are whatever they sort of say they're trying to do, are somewhat different from developing a long-term decision support agenda for the government. Whereas in the US, they have the Department of Energy National Lab Network, and there are some of these activities which very much are the business of national labs, in terms of doing things which require research research type skills, but maybe the implementation isn't research. It's working out how to do it is research. Maybe actually doing it wouldn't count thus. And also simply having ongoing core funding, so that these programs like this can be developed in a coherent way in longer term, as long as they continue to have value. I don't know to what extent any of that applies in public health.
I don't know either. I mean, presumably we've got things like Public Health England.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I think it's the case, just simply from what I know about. For instance, it's simply the fact there are things called NRC laboratories. I mean, that implies a level of ongoing continuity that isn't the case in energy. So I'm part of the EPSRC National Centre for Energy Systems Integration, which is a 5-year research contract, and for an extension, we're needing to go in for a further 5-year thing, but as just in standard competitive mode as a program grant. So there isn't a mechanism for continuity there. And of course, also, so there's a lot of with these as I said, with these big projects, which in some sense have a combination of a research mission and a national lab or national coordinating type mission, the funding structure doesn't map well onto the national role aspects of these consortia's missions.
Yeah, you make a good point.
Yes, I was just wondering where that all, that's not technical model challenges, but presumably needs to be in one of the other.
Yeah, it's probably again the implementing. Maybe it's the implementing change, which might naturally sort of suck in a number of other organisational issues.
Yeah, that sounds good. Now that could certainly be fit in there, couldn't it? Be good.
Do we have any more comments for Ben?
Sorry, I think we missed that, Lisa.
Oh, sorry. Do we have any more comments for Ben's 10.7? I think it looks good. If Ben, if you just want to remove the bullet points.
Oh yeah, I'll work on that this week.
And then if you want to try the sort of bold fonting, the kind of key point as we do with the modelling, yeah. And if Peter can add in his section whenever that's ready. Okay, and then should we take a quick look at the one I wrote? So 10.6, understanding competing factors.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot shorter, so it shouldn't take long to read. And then we can see where we are with the others.
There's from what I remember on the interaction between modelers and economists, there's a useful discussion of this from Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance when they gave evidence before the Science and Technology Committee of Parliament in about November. There's probably a precise date or link for that in the draft blog piece that's on from me. It wasn't exactly giving solutions, but it was pointing. I recall it was pointing out that the activity under SAGE is distinct from where economic advice was coming in. The point that I did find a little bit strange there, I recall, again, this is me recalling something I listened to a couple of months ago. But I did actually listen to the whole 2 3/4 hours of the proceedings. I recall that Vallance. I was a bit surprised by, I think, something Vallance said about the economic modelling being on someone else's desk, because as I just thought that as chief scientific advisor, he would be taking a bit more. He would have accepted a general interest in model-based decision support as being part of his remit. And I mean, one issue in government is that that area is spread across a number of centres. So HM Treasury have a role in oversight, which is independent, which is somewhat independent of the scientific professions. Of course, you get all the different scientific professions who have different perspectives, and you probably have different people who actually take decisions on paying for anything, and so on and so forth.
That's great. Yeah, I'll take a look. Thank you. Yeah. I do find it odd that there isn't a SPY E.
Yeah. Well, there probably is. It's just that it's just that for some reason it sailed under the radar a bit. There's probably somewhere in HM Treasury, but they're not. Maybe they just don't spout off in the media as much. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure it exists in some capacity.
Yeah. The one thing I'd again in it's something I think I mentioned a bit in the section I wrote, is when you're saying modelers, for example, will be restricted by availability and quality of data, time taken for data clean, and so on and so forth. I think that again could link to the what people in universities get out of bed for, or get incentivized for, because sometimes these things, which if you're going to use things in production runs, are vitally important. I mean, if the contribution of your paper is the new model structure that you have for modeling a certain phenomenon, and then the runs, to an extent, for the purpose of the scientific publication, our numbers go in, numbers come out, then there's a big tension between that and if you're using things for production runs, when it matters of data collection, data curation, and code quality are critically important. Having said that, I mean, one phenomenon that I've observed and this is entirely something I've observed in the energy community, is that you do get, I do think sometimes that there's a sort of overemphasis on matters of transparency and data curation and so on, at the expense of thinking about whether the underlying modelling is actually any good. Probably because in my very cynical moods, I say because people kind of know how to do the transparency side.
I guess again, that last paragraph that Lisa's written about collaboration between modelers, economists and behavioural scientists should be funded from the outset. Again, that sort of feeds into. Yes, but also to have some sort of links going forward between emergencies, not just sort of trying to get everything up and going, you know, when emergencies strike and everybody's in panic mode. But if you've got a network, at least a basic sort of set of communications established at a lower level, then you can sort of begin to ramp things up. But if you've got a core group of people or whatever, or small groups, research groups, whatever, that can be the basis of that, that's already ongoing, it makes it easier. I mean, we could argue that it's why places like Imperial and the London School have been able to do a lot of the early work, was because they were already there and working and funded and all the rest of it. But somehow one needs that between groups as well as within, so that you've got particularly the economists I'm thinking of, but it's all the same point, being sort of it crops up everywhere, doesn't it?
And then I didn't actually write anything for the last bullet point, actually. Which I guess is more of a request for policymakers when communicating.
Right. You know, I guess it's a question of communicating understanding of what the models are and what they incorporate and don't incorporate.
Yeah, it's the fact the models are only ever going to be part of the system, partly because they're models and therefore they're not correct in that sense. They're useful but not correct, and they have to be balanced with all these other things.
Yeah, and one point there again, I'm actually quite directly quoting Michael Goldstein from Durham here. Is that the only people who are going to be able to make this assessment of the model real world link are the modelers themselves, and it's best to illustrate that, I think, by a sort of negative side of it, which is, again, this is something that I see commonly in energy, where you might get a modeling study handed over with a list of caveats, but and that then is completely, there are basically two things that can happen. One is that the all the caveats are just ignored, and the other is that the decision makers will say, well, we've got this huge list of caveats that just kills the value of this study. The non-modeling layer is rarely going to have any ability to make their own interpretation of the significance of all of these caveats. So it's the responsibility should be ultimately this has to be done in the context of what the interests of the decision makers are. But the only people who are ever going to be able to assess quantitatively the significance of any kind of caveats or modeling assumptions are the modeling layer.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I can write a bit more for that one. Do we think this point should be left in understanding competing factors, or could also be covered in communication?
I guess it's really communication, at least as you've got it worded at the moment.
Yeah.
Unless you want to have a sentence here and perhaps refer to the communication more generally, but say that obviously one needs understanding of competing factors by well, everybody really. I mean, not policymakers clearly, but also the public and anybody who's got to implement a response in some way.
I've just seen Carrie Ann has joined. Hello.
Yeah, there's a little note.
I think she is also homeschooling to some degree as well.
Hi, sorry. Like it's
Hello.
break time at the moment.
Yeah, we've just been looking through the paragraphs that we have so far.
Okay, so I've started, because nobody's got their name against the international stuff, I've started trying to write something, but
That's great.
I don't know a lot about the different models, but I know what the issues are with trying to create an international model. So I'm going down that route, and then if you'll want to rewrite it, that's absolutely fine. I won't be offended.
But I think that
and I'm avoiding putting in a big section going, why have the Wellcome Trust cancelled our infectious disease dynamics course at this point? Now they're feeling a bit silly, I should think.
Yeah, that's good. That sounds like a good angle. That's the angle I would have gone for. Yeah. Okay, so we've thinking about what we want to do next. So Dennis wanted to have a go at 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I think Duncan's working on 4. Carrie Ann on 3. I could have a go at communication. So far I've just put in an example paragraph, but I can have a go at writing a bit more. And then we've got something written for 6, 7, and 8. So altogether, I think that is something for everything, which is a good start. So for next week, if we want to, those that have, Chris and Ben, if you want to just add in whichever updates you wanted to add. And I know Chris and Duncan are working together on something as well. And then those of us that have volunteered to write a bit more, try to get that done for Tuesday. And then we should hopefully have a few paragraphs of each challenge. Would be a very good place to start, I think. So Valerie, at the beginning you mentioned the timeline whilst everyone was joining.
Yeah.
So the aim for these papers is
Gone quiet.
something we're happy with.
Sorry, you've gone quiet again.
Oh. Is it back?
Not yet. You were just starting to say that I said we should aim for sort of towards the end of March to have a paper, a finished paper that we were happy with.
Yes. Can you hear me yet?
Well, I mean, we can, it's just, it's very quiet.
Oh, okay.
And then suddenly you'll come sort of booming back. So, I mean, we can all turn up our sound, but then you're back now.
Better? Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
appearing. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So as Valerie said, end of March. I think in terms of our paper, we're all wanting to give it to a few people in the group who are sort of more on the front line in terms of working with policymakers, aren't we? Because we have a few who can't make regular meetings, but we'll definitely be able to give some good insight and have said they're happy to sort of review things and I guess check we're saying the right things. So we want to factor that in sort of timescale.
If we think that we can put the rest of the paragraphs in the next week or two, so that it can then be put as a paper, it could presumably at that point go, where are we now, 12th, sort of even early February, it might be able to have something that could go to a few people for comment.
Yeah, and then that gives them a couple of weeks to comment and us a couple of weeks to make any small or large changes as whatever is.
Well, I mean, hopefully, if there's something they think has been, I mean, obviously there's tinkering with wording, but if they think that there's a sort of big issue that's been omitted, they will produce a paragraph that can be slotted in.
Well, I think more
plug the gap.
I think more than that. I mean, I'd be happy to consider people either changing or changing the list of challenges. Really,
Oh, sure, yeah.
You're missing the point on challenge 5, whatever it is. But how about this instead, or whatever. So I'd be keen to do that as soon as possible. I think, but I think you're right, Valerie. We need a if we've got something written on each section that we can just put together as a quotes first draft. Once you've got a first draft, I think that's so I think we should try and do that before the end of January, so we can send it to a few. I mean, I think like people like Chris Dye, who is instrumental in sort of helping us organise the whole Future Pandemics lectures, and I'd really like to get him involved in several of the challenges. I think so the numbers 1 and 2 possibly, but certainly this one. And
Chris would be very useful with
several other people. Others will mention also, but I think if we're to try and engage them, of course they may be too busy or whatever. But if they're prepared to be engaged, I think we want to give an opening where they can see that if they want to tell us we've got it a little bit confused, we're not quite going the right direction, and we at least need another section on what they think of as the right direction, where we take that on board before it's too late.
But that sounds good.
I think we've got a structure at the moment. Let's go with it, but it'd be nice to have a clear-cut stage where we can reconsider it and regroup and say, we might decide one of our sections is really too waffly and isn't really a challenge, and we want to either take its best bits and put them somewhere else or replace it with something different.
Well, that of course is that we haven't at the moment, in the way, because Lisa identified these 8 sort of challenge areas. The paper as a whole might well want to have an introduction and possibly even a discussion section at the end, though that's less clear, but certainly some introduction. So, that's all got to be put in there.
Well, it might well be that if we go to people like that, that the kind of comments they make will actually be things that we can put into an introduction or discussion.
Yeah.
So,
But also, you were saying that, you know, some of it might have got a bit waffly, and that it might be that the waffly bits need to go in the introduction rather than in the challenge bits.
yeah.
So we just need to give ourselves time to actually think about all that. Yeah, I think Chris would be really good because he's got a very good sort of international view of policy. I mean, there are people, I don't know who else people are thinking of. Obvious people are Frank Kelly and Bernard Silverman, who've been chief scientific advisors, who've got a good idea of, you know, how government policy works. But I don't know who else do you
I think one thing the introduction should clarify, and perhaps one should be trying to draft this sooner rather than later, because it might help see if we've missed something, is just trying to, you know, improving policy going forward is a lot about improving collaborations between different groups of people, and I'm not sure we've identified or are giving equal weight to all the collaborations that are needed. You know, there's within each country, there's collaboration between potentially competing scientific groups who don't talk to each other, or scientific groups whose expertise is only thrown together by a new situation. You know, one example might be people who are good at the fluid dynamics of aerosol dispersion being thrown together with epidemic modelers. So there's within the scientific community, there's then the whole interface between science and government, which, you know, I think we've made a lot of good remarks about, because that's something I think we're all having rubbed under our noses and think about a lot. And then there are these international angles, and very likely in saying that I've missed something out important. So I think an introduction that sort of brings things together would be good.
I remember Frank Kelly, I think it was in the data discussions, but somewhere anyway, talking about sort of communication and getting things done within government departments or between government departments and so on, and saying that it was sort of the personal aspects that really enable things to, you know, if there are all sorts of rules and regulations swapping, I suppose if you want to move data held by one government department and somebody in another department wants to work it, there are all sorts of protocols and things that you have to go through, procedures to go through in order to enable that. But if there's a personal contact that can be exploited, it is usually much easier. And that requires, you know, people to know each other and trust each other and so on and so forth. And I guess that same point is due here, but sort of writ larger.
Yeah.
But Frank might be able to say something of that.
Yeah. It would also be really good to get some feedback from Julia, but Julia Gog. But,
yes,
indeed. And you may or may not have a few minutes.
Graham Medley would be another. I mean, I know I know he's very willing to be involved, but has almost no time. But if we give him something that he can just look at and comment on, I think people like that. They haven't got the time to write really, but they are happy to be involved and to comment. So I think Graham would be a good person there.
Yeah.
Maybe okay, John Oakland too. Would he be another person? Well, I suppose they're both London schools, so maybe that's duplication too.
Yeah, okay, I've jotted those down. Okay, so with that in mind, suggested schedule going forwards. So today's the 12th. If maybe by the 19th we're able to have something written, however quickly, for each challenge that we can take a look at next week. And then by the 26th, so that interim week, if we could spend, maybe I can just quickly glue everything together, and then each of us could just sort of take a quick look and see how it looks as sort of one kind of continuous document. And then that takes us to the end of January, where we'll have, hopefully, a first draft that we've kind of had a quick look through, and that we might be ready to sort of start thinking about sending to those that we've just mentioned.
And when we're in that second of those 2 weeks, when we're sort of looking at it all, it might be good to sort of try and jot down any points that we think either move to the introduction or want to make in an introduction. You know, I mean, even if it's not written, if we've just got a list of points to be made, that might be useful thing.
Okay. And then that gives us sort of early February to think about sending it out. And then, as Dennis said, there's lots of time for people to say, I think you've missed this, or we need to add in lots of time for progress. Okay. Oh, something just to mention to Kerry Ann. Is that how you pronounce it? I'm sorry if I've pronounced it incorrectly.
Sorry, I missed you then, Lisa.
I was just checking I've pronounced your name correctly. Is it Kerry Ann?
Yeah, it's Kerry Ann. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Right. Just what we were discussing earlier for style for these paragraphs. What Ben and myself have done so far is take the kind of notes as bullet points and just try to write a sort of paragraph about each one. And then what we're now intending to do is sort of take out the bullet points. So if you look at my one, for example, the aim is to remove the bullet points, so it's just sort of continuous prose. And then what we've been doing in the modelling paper that's been quite helpful is to kind of bold font perhaps the first sentence or so in each paragraph, the kind of the key point that you're making, as a sort of sub-challenge. That's just kind of the format that we're thinking to go with. I just realised you missed that before. I think, yeah, so if you want to aim for something like that, but however it turns out is fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, anything anyone else wants to add?
No,
That's it for now.
Great, thank you.
got some work to do.
I think we're getting there, yeah. Yeah. Lots of work to do, yeah. End of March seems like a long way away, but end of January does not.
Soon
Okay.
come.
Okay, so if we sort of meet same time next week and see where
Perfect.
we're at. Great, okay. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Lisa.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.